Scott says, what is your stance on net neutrality given how the internet has become such an important part of how we learn? So I don't believe in net neutrality. I think I explained this a few days ago on the show, didn't I? I did a whole segment on net neutrality, I thought, where I discussed at length the idea that ISPs, basically net neutrality is the suggestion. It was only put into place in the last couple of years of the Obama administration. And before that, the internet was working just fine. Net neutrality is basically the suggestion that internet service providers have to supply traffic, supply all use of traffic the same price. So Netflix, which eats up an enormous amount of bandwidth, has to be charged the same as some schmo in his basement who is just loading up his blog. And it's also, net neutrality also says that all pages have to be loaded at the same speed. Well, the problem with that, of course, is that it benefits big corporations like Netflix over the little guy. The reality is that if you're taking up a huge share of the bandwidth, then you might there might be companies that say, you know, we will provide you a faster access, but you have to pay more money. It's not incumbent on internet service providers to be forced to be treated like public utilities. The way to think of it is that internet service providers are like the pipes, and the content of the internet is like water. So you can think of it in two ways. It's a public utility. Everybody should be able to turn on the tap at the same time and get the water, or that the pipe company should be able to charge you what they want, or charge the water company what it wants for the water moving through the pipes. The reason it's not quite like a pipe is because you can have multiple pipes, right? There are multiple internet service providers. One of the reasons that net neutrality has become such an issue is because of special deals with local governments by a lot of the internet service providers, so they're the only providers in their region. If there were open competition, you would actually see competition. Like for people, for example, who only use email but don't watch streaming video, right? Like older people who only want to watch TV but don't actually want to use Netflix or Hulu, they should be able to get the internet cheaper than people who want to be able to get Netflix and Hulu. Right? Or if you only want to get Netflix and Hulu and you don't use email, right? You just use text messages. You should be able to have these options. There's nothing wrong with any of this. This is why when people say it's a corporate giveaway to get rid of net neutrality, there are major corporations like Google and Netflix who basically want to prevent smaller companies from being able to take advantage of differential pricing on ISPs to compete with them. So it depends which corporations you're talking about. Google is a huge corporation. Facebook's a huge corporation. Twitter is a huge corporation. All of them are in favor of net neutrality because they're content providers. All the ISPs are in favor of getting rid of net neutrality. Bottom line is the internet was fine before anybody started messing with it. Net neutrality, the odd passion over net neutrality has always puzzled me. Moshe says, hi, Ben. Everyone appreciated when the North Korean soldier fled the regime and made his escape to freedom. Logistically, what is the difference between that soldier and Mexican citizens wanting to escape to a better life in America? Love the show. So as I've said before, I think people who are trying to escape horrible situations to come to a better life, I don't blame somebody for trying to jump the border. I've said this many times, and I've been very clear about this and pretty consistent on it. If I were living in Mexico, I'd also try to jump the border because America's an amazing place. Like if I had no other choice, but that does not mean that the United States has an obligation to take those people in. It doesn't. The U.S. gets to pick who gets to come into the country and who does not. The U.S. gets to do that. So it's not up to South Korea to say we must take in everyone from North Korea. Right? South Korea can say, no, we're going to put that person in some sort of temporary internment camp until we can figure out where they ought to immigrate to, for example. But the idea that everyone who is fleeing human rights violations has therefore a claim on your country is not true. Also, I would say that the Mexican government is not equivalent to the North Korean government anyway. There are lots of problems in Mexico, including drug cartels, but Mexico is not North Korea. North Korea is a giant prison state. There is no wall keeping Mexicans in. Okay, Damien says, I was talking about God with my friend. He said, since God is almighty, why would he test us by giving us free will? God is almighty, so he knows the future and would know the results of that free will test. What can I answer? God wants us to earn. God wants us to feel fulfilled. One of the way God loves us, and so he wants us to feel fulfilled. The way that people feel fulfilled is not by being given things, and it's not even if you know what somebody's going to do. It's being given a choice and then acting in accordance with that free will. Free will is what makes life meaningful. So what I would ask your friend is how he would define the existence of free will without God or without a supernatural. If you're a scientific materialist, there's no evidence whatsoever that free will exists. Sean says, have you thought about your New Year's resolution yet? Well, actually, the truth is that Jews do our New Year's resolutions around Rosh Hashanah. During the Jewish New Year, that's why we do it in actual atonement. I would say the Jewish New Year is a lot more meaningful than the secular New Year, where we all get drunk and then pretend we're going to lose weight and then don't. Tom says, last week you said DC movies should have 20% added to their critical scores. Marvel movies should have 20% taken away. Why do you think DC movies should receive affirmative action? Shouldn't they have to stand on their own mediocrity? I'm not saying that Rotten Tomatoes has to do that. I'm saying if you want an accurate portrayal of how DC movies are treated, then you should add, like if in your own mind, you should add 20% to the Rotten Tomatoes score because everything they say is 30 for a DC movie is a 50, and everything they say is a 90 for a Marvel movie is a 70. That's all I'm saying. I'm saying that the critics are biased in favor of Marvel and they are biased against DC. But I'm not saying that the critics have to do that. I mean, the critics can do whatever the hell they want. That's why I don't pay attention to the critics a lot. Luke says, "Hi, Ben. I've heard you say you do not believe Jesus was the Son of God. My question is, have you read C.S. Lewis's Trilemma, where he concedes as a Christian that if Jesus was not God, then he was a madman or something worse? Given you don't think Jesus was divine, weren't his words or actions wickedly immoral? Thanks, an Aussie atheist conservative fan." No. So one of the reasons that Jews reject Jesus is because we don't believe the authenticity of the Gospels, meaning that if we actually believe the authentic, so C.S. Lewis's proof relies on you believing the historicity of the Gospels, that everything the Gospel said was true, and therefore either Jesus was crazy, or Jesus was evil, or Jesus was telling the truth, right? That's the trilemma. Well, I don't think that, like, as a Jew, like, the Jewish perspective on Jesus is that that's not actually the case, right? The Jewish perspective on Jesus is that the people who wrote the Gospels were writing the Gospels decades after Jesus' death, and that Jesus was actually pretty much a normal Orthodox Jew who tried to lead a rebellion against the Romans and was killed for his trouble. That he was attempting to lead a secular messianic movement, because that's, and when I say secular, I mean a Jewish messianic movement, because the Jewish Messiah there's no notion of divinity entering the world through the Jewish Messiah. Tom says, is Michael Knowles on salary or paid per word? Sadly, Michael Knowles is on salary. I have desperately been trying to pay him for word for a couple of years now. Again, one of the great moments of my career will be firing Michael Knowles. Jonathan says, Ben, what role, if any, should opinion polls play in the decision-making process for politicians? Well, they should be used as feedback, but they shouldn't be used as guidance. So what I mean by that is it's good to know what people like and what people don't, because that also allows you to tailor your message on what is good policy. But I don't think that you should shift your policy preferences based on public opinion. I don't think that it should be like, well, I'm for tax cuts, but now the public hates it, I'm for tax increases. I don't think that's right. You should either believe that something's going to work or believe that it's not going to work, and facts are facts and feelings are feelings. Elena says, hey, Ben, if you had to pick a single moment or period of time that profoundly impacted your life, what would it be? Well, I honestly believe I haven't been alive very long. I'm only 33. So I believe that there have been several, kind of key periods of my life. I would say that one of those key periods was when I was growing up and I went to middle school. I went to public school, and I was viciously bullied there, and then I was viciously bullied in high school. I think it's not a good thing that it happened, but it's a character-building exercise. You have to grow a thick skin, and you have to learn that the world is not your friend, and that you're going to have to make your own way. And so I think that was a deeply upsetting but valuable experience to me. Harvard Law School is a great place to learn how to argue and learn how to think. I think that the last year and a half has been a really tremendous character-building experience and has changed my thought process. It's really interesting. The other day, somebody wrote a column criticizing me and talking about a column I wrote in 2007 about dissenters from the Iraq War. There were a bunch of Democrats at the time, like Dick Durbin, who were talking about how they were glad that America was basically losing the war in Iraq. And I said this was traitorous, essentially. And in a column, I even said that we should revivify the Alien Sedition Act, not the Alien Sedition Acts, the Espionage Act from 1917 under Woodrow Wilson. I feel, and then Barack Obama became president.
You've changed my life in a way because your talks on anti-fat acceptance, fat shaming, if you will. And I've lost 20 kilos since halfway through last year.
Congratulations, sir.
So thank you for that. And completely unrelated, what are your thoughts on net neutrality? The whole...
Oh, you're all wrong about it. Because everybody in this room thinks net neutrality is a good idea, and it isn't. You all think it's going to go to some sort of hellish corporate America-ruled, dystopian hell where your email is going to get slowed down to a crawl because you can't afford the expensive whatever. Horse shit. All it's doing is taking the internet back to where it was a couple of years ago anyway. And by the way, this is going to be technical, it's going to bore some of you, but I'm going to give you a serious answer since you asked. Net neutrality basically means that every packet of data, every little lump of information on the internet should be treated equally, agnostically of what it contains. So it forbids, for instance, your cable provider, the people who do your internet, so in America it'd be like AT&T or Comcast or whatever, from selling you a service where Netflix is faster, right? So you could pay more to get better quality of video with no buffering and all the rest of it. HBO and Netflix come like beautiful, crisp 4K, like that, because you paid more for it. In my view, this is, the FCC started this under Obama, this net neutrality thing. It's not, the George Soros-funded organizations that are pushing net neutrality and advocating for more government control of the internet have told you two big lies. The first one is that the government should regulate the internet rather than the free market. It is much better, in my view, to have customers and private companies negotiate their own relationship and the market to decide what it can bear, what people are prepared to put up with, and for competition to produce the best results. And second of all, they have told you that this is, about making sure that there's an open, free, internet of an equality internet where everyone gets equal access to whatever. That has never been the case. Every service provider, every server already shapes data. They already shape traffic, excuse me. All of the stuff that net neutrality is designed to eradicate, it never will, because Vodafone is always going to mess around with things. What are your cell networks over here, whatever, Telstra, whatever, they're always going to send some things faster than others, and that will never change. Net neutrality is a cosmetic announcement on the one hand, but really what it represents is the license for the federal government, for the FCC, to wade in and interfere in the relationship between private people and their providers, and to stop companies from providing richer, better, tailored packages to you, the consumer. It is about more government control over a critical utility. So if you're one of those people who reflexively thinks net neutrality sounds like a good idea, you're right, it does sound like a good idea, but you're wrong. It's terrible, and it's just another mechanism of government control, and I want the government out of that completely, out of that relationship.
I want you to answer the question of the day, but I want you to watch this entire video first. Not only am I asking you, what's your opinion on net neutrality? Everyone's doing that, like, what's your opinion? But what's your opinion on today's sort of selective corporate outrage? Because that's what's surrounding net neutrality right now, is outrage over corporations, their control over the internet, while ignoring the world's biggest corporations who are ardent supporters of net neutrality. And that's something that concerns me and gets a little lost in the cracks. Both sides have arguments with merit. So I want to kind of get into those who are very pro-net neutrality and why they believe so and why there's validity to it. Listen, I'm going to roll a clip here, and it's not because I don't like Philip DeFranco. I actually really like Philip DeFranco. I think he's one of the few fair-minded people on the internet. He's been invited on the show. Hopefully we'll have him on soon. I'm actually rolling this clip of Philip DeFranco because he's talked about net neutrality for a long time, and I think he's a pretty good representative of how opposition to, I guess, sort of the current allowing of lapsing of legislation feels. So let's let him set up that side of the argument.
A certain cell service says, hey, if you go with us when you watch Netflix, that doesn't go towards your data cap. Or maybe it's with Hulu or whoever. Now imagine your broadband internet right in your home. All of a sudden you have Comcast. They say, hey, guess what? When you use Hulu, you get the top tier, the premium speed. And they have an incentive. They own a good percentage of Hulu. But then guess what? Netflix, Amazon Prime, those places don't get our fast lane for the internet. It's slower, it's clunkier. Maybe if Netflix or Amazon Prime, they pay us, we'll give them the fast lane. You gotta pay a tax if you want to go over our fast lane bridge. Imagine if Comcast or another ISP launched a competitor to YouTube, and then they could just slow down the speeds to YouTube for their customers. To which you could argue, and the chairman of the FCC now does. Well, hey, if an ISP is going to do that, the market will decide we don't want Comcast. The market will keep companies honest and fair, and no. You know how many people have Comcast and they don't want Comcast, but they have to have Comcast because there aren't really any other option?
Okay, I like Philip DeFranco, but there's an irony there that we're looking at the same argument and seeing an entirely different conclusion. He's saying, could you imagine if your broadband company did what your mobile carrier company did? I'm going, could you imagine if broadband was finally as good as the mobile carrier plans out there?
Exactly, right.
And he's talking about creating a competitor to YouTube. Yeah. And this is a guy who's been very outspoken, as we have, about YouTube selectively curating and censoring people. So I'm going to come back to that, which is also why I find it kind of odd when people just gloss over something. Here's clip B.
Google issued a statement saying the FCC's net neutrality rules are working well for consumers, and we're disappointed in the proposal released today.
Yeah, Google, huge supporter of net neutrality. We'll come back to that and go, well, why? Because it shouldn't really affect them directly. Okay, few claims that come from net neutrality. Before I get to that, let me set up a worldview. Here's what I think is important, okay? And again, please just hold your thoughts. This is meant to be a discussion on net neutrality because there are reasonable voices on both sides of this issue. It is nuanced, and anytime you get into tech dialogue, people can get really confused. Oh, yeah. So we're going to try and avoid doing that. Here's the deal. Do you believe that human beings are inherently prone to corruption? Yes? Okay, so do I. Do you believe that corporations are inherently prone to corruption? Yes. Do you believe that people/corporations are inherently prone to corruption the bigger and more powerful they get? Yes, we both agree. Now, do you believe the only exception to that is YouTube, Google, Facebook, and the United States federal government? If not, you're going to have some apprehension about net neutrality. Okay, that's where the worldview comes in. So let's look at it through that lens. Here are some of the things that people claim with net neutrality. We need net neutrality because there aren't enough ISP choices, internet service providers, and the market, as I said, they don't have. It only has power if there are enough choices. Okay. Yeah. Do you know who actually would most benefit and most love to see net neutrality repealed? Small rural ISPs. That's something a lot of people don't talk about. Just Verizon, Comcast, AT&T, it's easy to talk about big evil corporations and not talk about the smaller companies that would stand to benefit. So net neutrality can really harm smaller ISPs. Under net neutrality, as we have them now, ISPs have to submit proposals for any new technology, or I think it's new technology or business model. This is the exact quote. So on top of all the red tape, right, and all of the costs, the burdening costs, the FCC can also turn down proposals without giving the company any opportunity to appeal. Does that sound like fostering innovation? Does that sound like something that would encourage competition? We also hear that we need to impose monopoly laws on ISPs in areas where there's little competition. So this goes back to kind of telecom communication companies, right? Title II, regulating them like that. A lot of people have talked about regulating YouTube and Facebook and Twitter as telecommunication companies under Title II, and I've defended them and said, no, I don't think that anyone should force them to treat content equally. But that ties into why there's a reason that they actually support net neutrality. We'll come back to that. So there's actually this article from Fast Company, and this is what they write about. They write about a company. What's the name of the company? I think it's
Cable One. Cable One.
Cable One, yep. Right? So they talk about Cable One covering being the only option, right, for broadband in rural areas. Okay. And so this is an article that they write about. They talk about how if they were regulated under Title II as telecommunication companies, well, the government would actually be able to set the rates because Cable One keeps raising the prices. Now, they keep raising the prices. Why? Because they're the only one there. So they say that they're raising prices. Now, that being said, their prices are somewhere around $80 per month, which is actually pretty much right middle of the road. It's not like it's completely outlandish. Right. Sure. But these articles that have been sent to me by Fast, I've had this sent to me a dozen times. Think about this for a second. Let's assume, okay, the smaller rural ISP, Cable One, is evil and their only goal is to screw people, and that's why they're jacking up prices. What happens if the government does set rates on Cable One? Let me ask you this. Genuinely, what do you think happens? Do you think that if there's a set ceiling, Cable One is going to be providing better internet? Do you think they're going to be upgrading their servers? Do you think they're going to be upgrading, their abilities? They're going to be upgrading their speeds? They're going to be creating better packages? Or if the rates are set, do you think it's more likely that they're just going to say, all right, this is where we are? And let me ask you this. Do you think it's more or less likely if the rate is set in that area, let's say rural Mississippi, for another competing ISP to come in and make a killing putting Cable One out of business? Where is it more or less likely for those people to get better internet service? So another claim that we hear a lot is if we repeal net neutrality, there will be separate packages, right? This is what Philip DeFranco, a lot of people talk about. Internet access, video streaming, emails, that'll be split up, that they'll be throttled, right? This is a slippery slope without a lot of support. There are only 2 instances, and they're a little more complicated than people let on. I think it was Comcast with Netflix, and AT&T hit a huge fine for throttling people if they're unlimited, putting them back down to slower speeds. But all of that was corrected, not because of legislation, but because it was immediately made public, and it was so toxic that people started dropping their plans.
The market was pissed.
The market was pissed. Mobile data plans, remember how they used to be so extremely limited? They were and people now are fearing that broadband packages will be like that without net neutrality. Where have you seen more competition? Where have you seen your rates become more competitive, your plan become better? Your mobile data plan or broadband? What you're paying for right now. Because now mobile plans are unlimited with faster and faster speeds thanks to a free market. Another claim that we hear a lot is that we have to have net neutrality because big evil corporations. People think, well, because a big company supports it, it must be bad. But then there's another big company that supports it. And in this case, you have the world's biggest companies in Google and Facebook who, by the way, unlike the ISPs, they have a long and storied history of dishonest censorship and throttling and content favoritism. Facebook alone, I don't know how many tens of times. And this begs the question, why is Google, YouTube, and Facebook, why are these giant companies so adamant about supporting net neutrality? Here's something else crazy. Big companies like Google, they're not really customers of ISPs. They connect directly to the web, directly through internet exchange points. So it doesn't directly affect them. But you'd be hard-pressed to find people who would support regulating YouTube, Google, certainly small government libertarians as a telecommunications company under the guidelines that would basically force them to allow all content to be uploaded and distributed equally. But I would support, and this is a big step for a libertarian, small government libertarian like me, under Title II, if we agree to transparency laws, which is a big part of the repealing of net neutrality right now, it's, okay, listen, first off, there are still antitrust laws, there are still monopoly laws, so if you're to throttle, which you're not supposed to do, you have to let your customer base know.
Yeah.
That's a big part of this legislation. That's a big part of this change, is transparency is being given the priority. Now, I would not support regulating YouTube, Facebook, Google under Title II if it's, you have to treat all content equally,
Right.
but I would support putting them under that kind of regulation if it just means that they have to be transparent with people using YouTube. Hey, listen, you can throttle conservative content. You can tell conservatives they can't upload. You can tell people who are politically incorrect that they can't upload. You can allow pedophiles to upload to YouTube Kids all you want, but you have to disclose it to your user base. And that's why when you put the puzzle pieces together and you think about it, you go, hold on a second, why would YouTube and Google and Facebook be such huge supporters of net neutrality if it didn't affect them? I think it opens the door to people saying, hey, we can regulate an industry here just by ensuring that they are transparent. Basically, the government is a referee at that point. The government is a referee with its whistle saying, hey, you're breaking the rules there. We're going to put you in the penalty box. On the other hand, you have a fence right here, right? You have a line. So people talking about evil corporations, you're saying, okay, this is the big evil corporations are against net neutrality. Okay, here's the line. On one side you do. You have Verizon, you have AT&T, you have Comcast, you have small rural ISPs as well. You have a lot of companies, okay? That's on this side of the line. On the other side, you do have Google, YouTube, Facebook, and potentially the federal government. Now, the government is not a referee. It's not enforcing transparency. It's picking sides. They have buddies in their pocket, the biggest companies in the world. If you want to talk about monopolies, I would certainly say that Facebook and YouTube has more of a monopoly on the transfer of information, certainly media, than Cable
So
One.
much more.
Yeah. Than Cable One, providing 700,000 households in Missouri. And they are so adamantly pro-net neutrality because precisely if people say, wow, we can actually fix this industry, we can regulate it without stepping in, just making sure that they're following the rules, just making sure that they're disclosing with their customers what they're doing, guess what? You'd have a lot of people. As a matter of fact, you'd have people lining up to say, let's apply those standards to YouTube or Facebook. No. Let's not do that. Let's look at the evil cell phone companies who gave you unlimited data and gave you free hotspots and gave you free Spotify and free T-Mobile, Netflix downloading because they're the bad guys. They're the big evil corporations. Google, Facebook, we're the mom and pop shop. You don't need any transparency with us. This is why it comes back down to the worldview. Do you believe that anyone is exempt from the proclivity toward human corruption? I don't. Whether that's Comcast or Verizon, just like people who support net neutrality, I agree with you, but I also don't believe that Google, Facebook, and YouTube have pure motives here, nor the big government legislators who want to have their hands in the pocket. Hey, did you like this video? Of course you did. Unless there's something wrong with you, in which case you can comment below. What's your problem with this video? We want to hear from you, and we promise you 100%, I give you, my word is my bond, we'll answer every single negative comment. For those who are normal, you can leave a thumbs up and subscribe.